Hey, you're here with Dr. Jodi, and this is season 2 of Anxiety. I am so done with you. This podcast is a teen and young adult guide to ditching toxic stress and hardwiring your brain for happiness. If you're new here, grab a copy of my book, Anxiety, I'm So Done With You, because this series is following section by section through the book, going a little bit deeper, giving more examples, and telling more stories. Season 2, which follows along with Chapter 2, is going through the lies that anxiety, depression, and negative thinking tell you to get you to believe them. Once you know what they are, you can see them coming a mile away and call them out. That way they can no longer sucker punch you with their toxicity. I appreciate you for listening, subscribing, and leaving me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If I've helped you at all, spread the word about this book and this podcast series. Mental health problems are invisible, so you never know who is struggling around you, and you sharing can make a huge difference in their lives. Welcome to this episode. We're finishing up Chapter 2 here, talking about lie number 7. You can't. This lie is the single most powerful tactic of anxiety. It says you can't, and we believe it hook, line, and sinker. And I'm right there with you, fighting off my own inner critic that tells me that I can't all the time. Even this podcast, I try so hard to make these clean, clear, and well-produced, and I keep making mistakes. I've even had to re-record them all at least once, and some of them I've re-recorded 2 or 3 times already. Anxiety picks up on those mistakes and tries to convince me that I just can't do this. And I have to push past these feelings of not being able to, not being skilled enough, not being able to read aloud well enough because of my dyslexia, thinking that my breathing is way too loud or that my small mouth noises are annoying, etc., etc., etc. It picks up on anything it thinks I'd care about. And I have to push past all of that because I know the information that I'm sharing in this podcast can help people. I hope I'm helping you. And my desire to help you helps me get out of my own way and do it, because that is more important than doing any of this perfectly. So, in this episode, we'll unpack this lie and I'll show you how to prove to yourself that it is untrue. We're going to define imposter syndrome, wicked competencies, and personal authority, and review how understanding yourself and your abilities helps you regulate your emotions. And finally, I'll detail how to start something when you feel like you can't. Let's get started. Remember, there is not much substance behind anxiety's lies, and this one is no different. It just says you can't, period. It doesn't even have to give a reason because you do that work for it. You think of all the times in your past that you didn't do things perfectly. To be honest, some of these memories of your past mistakes, and you can't see it, but I'm doing air quotes around mistakes because most of these mistakes have been blown out of proportion by your inner critic. And people take these blown out of proportion mistakes and make negative identity conclusions about themselves. They think, I'm a mess. I'm stupid. I'm annoying. They use I am. That's what I mean by negative identity conclusions, as if a mess or stupid or annoying is their very personhood. Even if you don't mean it like that, that is how your mind and body receives it. See, these affect us consciously and make us feel bad, but they also affect us unconsciously or implicitly and form inner limiting beliefs about who we are that limits what we could do. So when anxiety says you can't, it sounds right, and we accept that as a truth without question. Remember that Henry Ford quotation, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. I suggest you do question anxiety. When anxiety says you can't, you need to say, why not? When it says, you knew you couldn't before, you believed me, you say, no, really, why can't I? Hold its feet to the fire. Its success relies on you taking it at face value and not asking deeper. Vagueness is its superpower. Ask for details and it crumbles. Like, ask, why does the fact that someone who I thought was a friend was mean to me 3 years ago mean that I can't do anything right? And anxiety, when you say I can't do anything right, do you mean anything? Like I can't brush my teeth right? I can't put socks on right? I can't do any homework right at all? Listen, 95 to 97% of the things that we do in a day, we could do. We don't give ourselves credit for it because it doesn't seem like a big deal. We say everyone could do that. It's integrated and we take those abilities for granted. But it's not true that everyone could do those things. And given how you feel, it's pretty amazing that you do any of it. And it'll make you feel better to remember that. I've embedded my I'm a Mess video in the blog post that goes along with this episode to help you with that. In reality, only a small percentage of things provide a challenge for us. But when anxiety convinces us to think that it is everything, it feels awful. You know how I emphasize that when people struggle emotionally, feeling different than other people makes them feel worse? This is why I like to normalize emotional struggle, not to minimize people's experiences, but to decrease the heavy impact of their feeling different, because I think that's more damaging. In effort to normalize our emotional struggle, I'm going to tell you about what I was taught by my teacher, Michael White, and it has always powerfully stuck with me. People who report that they have mental health difficulties are stalled in 5% of their life. And people who report that they are free from mental health difficulties are stalled in 3% of their life. That means for everyone, 95 to 97% of their life is going okay, or at least it's benign. Benign means it's not harmful. Stalled means something has interrupted forward movement in life. Movement just means activity, ability, joy, or contentment. Getting stalled could be from a situation, a traumatic event, an emotion, having low bandwidth, an illness, an injury, or a negative thought pattern, any of those things, because stalled comes from a context. The takeaway from all of this is that there's only 2% difference. That 2% makes a huge difference in lived experiences. I know, it doesn't feel good to have mental health difficulties. But also the 2% means that there is not much to transverse to getting better. That's the good news. Okay, why was I telling you all that? Oh, the anxiety wants you to think you 100% can't and that you are 100% a mess. But that is categorically untrue, which is how we know it is lying. Plus, your abilities are not just about your personal adequacies. The first life form on Earth is estimated to have lived 3.7 billion years ago. That means brains evolved for 3.7 billion years. Even if you just want to think of it in humanoid brain years, the earliest known humans were the Homo habilis, and they lived over 2 million years ago. In those 2 million years, your human brain evolved to adapt, to learn, and to solve problems. Humans are the only animals with foresight, which is the ability to predict what will happen in the future. And I'm just going to let my nerd flag fly here and just lean into it because I find this really interesting and some of you might too. Helen Fisher is a cultural anthropologist who writes about early humans and gender dynamics, which I find fascinating. Her theory of how foresight was developed is from women tracking their menstrual cycle with the moon and being able to anticipate that pattern. The ability of foresight is amazing. It's a particular problem-solving skill that allows us to anticipate the outcomes and consequences of our actions and have that anticipation inform our choices. That gives us so much power. Anyhow, all of this is to say that you have power and abilities that are beyond you. And maybe you don't feel like that, but that's not your fault either. There's just not much in our daily lives that remind us of those abilities. And there's a lot in our daily lives that makes us think that we don't have those abilities. Remember from chapter 1, all those messages that you get every day that you're worthless and powerless and out of control? That's real. Anxiety doubles down or triples down on those to keep you doubting your abilities. Even if you do something that you're proud of, anxiety tries to sabotage that by berating you for thinking that you are better than you are or something. It's just nasty. This is often called imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is feelings of self-doubt and personal incompetence that persist despite your education, experience, and accomplishments. And I want to add, despite your adaptable and problem-solving evolved brain. Imposter syndrome has you assuming that you think you could do something that you can't do, and it shames you for thinking that. So you feel more honorable to think that you can't do it than to think that you can do it. It's so convoluted. A great way to override imposter syndrome and the anxiety and shame that comes with it is Mel Robbins' 5-second rule. Mel Robbins is a self-help author who wrote a book by the same title, 5-second rule. And the basic premise is that if you have to do something, count to 5 and do it. This circumvents the overthinking that usually gets in people's way of doing things. Like if you don't want to get out of bed, you count to 5 and you get up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. I interview people all the time about when they can do something and when they can't. And when they do it without thinking about it too hard. And when they don't do it, you can imagine, is when they start thinking about it and all these doubts and all these reasons or excuses come up. Think for a moment about a time that you were productive. Did you think a lot about what you had to do before you did it? Now think of a time where you couldn't do something. Did you think a lot about that? When you hesitate, your brain says something's wrong, find out what is wrong, and your adrenaline is released and the monkey looks for a problem. It is never hard for the monkey to find a reason or excuse that you can't do it. It's used to convincing you that you're not able, or whatever it is not worth your effort because of your inadequacies, you're going to fail anyway. And it may even sound logical and rational, but it is BS. You don't know whether you can do something or not until you do it. And in general, I find that humans are often very surprised about what they can do. They could do a lot more than they think they can. Next, let's talk about wicked competencies. A wicked problem is a complex problem. It usually refers to a social issue where there's no single solution, and the word wicked denotes resistance to resolution rather than evil. Examples of wicked problems are racism, poverty, and global warming. But you could have a smaller wicked problem, like how could a family get everyone where they have to be when there's only one car? Having wicked competencies are skills that prepare people to solve wicked problems. It is the ability to respond easily and on the fly to complex challenges. Paul Hanstead wrote a book for educators called Creating Wicked Students, where he tells teachers how to develop curriculum to improve students' wicked competencies. The benefits of this are that students build confidence in their innate abilities, and they develop more skills that build on those innate abilities, and they connect with their agency and authority. Personal agency is a person's skills and abilities to respond to the world. Personal authority means a belief in oneself, that you can adapt, you could problem solve, and you could figure things out. When you're connected to your agency and authority, anxiety could have very little power over you. However, in our modernly convenient world, we don't have to make shelter or find our own food. And so we have fewer situations where we could watch ourselves engage in that agency and authority. And that's why it's easier for anxiety to convince us that we don't have them. But you do have them. Everyone has agency and authority. In fact, despite modern conveniences, many of you have had to do a lot to ensure your survival because the context of your family is such that you are taking care of yourself a lot. While it's not okay that you have to bear the burden that you have, that situation could give you more connection to your authority because you've had to use it to survive. Unfortunately, any sense of abandonment and worthlessness that may have come with any neglect and abuse that you might have experienced could feel like it's canceling it out. However, it doesn't have to. When I work with people who've experienced trauma, I emphasize their skilled agency and authority, and then we use that to rewrite the perception of worthlessness. I agree with Paul Hanstead. I think it's so important to develop wickedly competent young people because this not only helps them feel better, it also has their eyes focused on solving the wicked problems of the world, which desperately need our attention. I hope you're starting to notice that in this series, when you learn more about yourself and what makes you tick, that understanding demystifies our problems in ways that empower you. When you understand the mechanisms of the problem, you stop blaming yourself for causing it, and you know how to fix it. Knowing why anxiety says you can't gives it different meaning. Instead of, yeah, I can't. That makes sense because I always mess up. It's not worth it. What's wrong with me? You say, oh, I get it, anxiety. I knew you'd say that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Problems feel different in our body after that. Take a moment to feel into what it feels like to understand why anxiety says you can't and how you now know that it is BS. I'm going to leave you with a study that had a huge impact on me. A psychology study from Kobe College in Japan divided 175 college students into 2 groups. One group did nothing but follow their usual lifestyles for a week, while the other group were given the task of counting their acts of kindness during the week. They weren't asked to try to do things for others. They just had to write down things that they did anyway. And after a week, the second group reported higher levels of happiness. We are doing things all day, every day. We are doing things. We just don't notice what we're doing. And when we notice it, it completely changes our happiness level. Here's an exercise that's similar that I've been teaching people for years. When I was younger and I did it, it totally changed how I saw myself and it changed my life, my daily life. You know, a gratitude journal. Have you heard of that? When you write down 3 things that you're grateful for? There's been tons of research in the last couple decades about a gratitude journal revealing that this small practice that you do every night improves emotional wellness and happiness. I like to add to this practice. I think you should add writing down 3 accomplishments that you did that day. So 3 things that you're grateful for, but when you're grateful for something, you could be a passive recipient of like the sunset. But when you write down 3 things that you accomplished, you're noticing the things that you had to use your agency for, something that you did. The actions could be really small, like helping your friend find something that they lost. It could be emptying the dishwasher, or it could be a little bit bigger, like finishing a school project. Every night, write down 3 things that you did that day. Listen, we have all in this Western culture been taught to see our deficits. They are constantly in our face, and you have to override it by practicing seeing your skills. You have them and you're doing these things each day, but you're probably not noticing it and you're probably not celebrating it. This practice, writing down 3 things every night that you did that day, could change that. After a while, you start to notice things all through the day that you did. You'll start to see yourself as empowered and able, and you'll really connect with the skills that you have and have confidence to grow more. This confidence will also have you engaging in things that had been outside your comfort zone in the past, and this will build more and more confidence and belief in yourself so that there is no room for anxiety to convince you otherwise. I'm going to leave it here for this episode because I gave you a lot, and I cannot wait to start chapter 3 next. I am chopping at the bit, trying not to get ahead of myself, but chapter 3 is going to continue about how to really step in your agency and authority and feel amazing in the process. Thank you so much for listening to Anxiety. I am so done with you. With me, Dr. Jodi. Don't forget to check out the blog post that goes along with this episode because I have more videos and resources that go along with what I share today. The link is in the show notes. Today, we covered anxiety's evasive lie, you can't. And we proved it to be untrue. I talked about imposter syndrome, wicked competencies, and personal authority. And I shared the 5-second rule for how to start something when you feel like you can't. Speaking of 5, I would love a 5-star review on Apple Podcast if time is on your side today. Next is Chapter 3, Section 1, Activate Your Power. Read or listen, and I'll see you there.